When Prince Edward's voice echoed through the quiet chamber, no one could have imagined what would follow. A royal secret buried beneath decades of silence was suddenly out in the open. Diana's name, a hidden tiara, and one shocking truth: it had never belonged to Camilla or Anne. It was meant for Catherine. Before we go deeper into what this really means for the royal family, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss a single update. It was meant to be a quiet gathering, just a routine advisory session at Windsor. But the air shifted the moment Edward rose. His hand trembled slightly, a sealed envelope held tightly between his fingers. He looked directly at King Charles, then slowly turned toward the others. What followed wasn't a request or a comment, it was a declaration. A royal artifact, long presumed to have been lost or discarded, had been found. Not just found, intentionally hidden. A tiara, unlike any other, was locked away in the Balmoral silver room, untouched for years. But its significance wasn't in the diamonds or design, it was in the message left behind. A message from Diana. Edward's voice cracked only once as he unfolded the parchment and read Diana's unmistakable handwriting. The room fell completely silent. The note was addressed not to William, not to the monarchy, not to history, but to Catherine. Diana had made it explicit. For the one who will carry the weight of both duty and compassion. This belongs to you. The impact of those words was immediate. Camilla's face drained of all colour. Anne leaned forward, her brow furrowed in disbelief. William, pale and visibly shaken, clenched his jaw without speaking. And Catherine silent, still, as though the wind had been knocked from her. The significance of the Balmoral silver room itself only deepened the drama. It wasn't a place many even knew existed. Reserved for the most private of royal heirlooms, its contents were shielded even from most senior advisors. For this tiara to have been placed there by Diana's own hand suggested not only intention, but secrecy. And the fact that Diana entrusted Edward, not her own son or even the Queen, to hold this knowledge made everything more complex, more personal, and infinitely more explosive. As the weight of Edward's revelation sank in, the family fractured in real time. Camilla shifted uncomfortably in her seat, lips pursed tightly. Her silence was louder than any outburst. Anne, usually the voice of command and clarity, appeared visibly conflicted. William's loyalty, torn between past and present, flickered in his expression, but it was Catherine's face that captured the moment, a face not of triumph, but quiet disbelief. She hadn't asked for this. She hadn't even known. And yet, Diana had chosen her. But to understand why this revelation struck at the monarchy's very foundation, we must go back to Diana's final weeks, her private intentions and the dangerous truths buried with her. In the haunting weeks before her death, Princess Diana made one final, quiet visit to Balmoral. What she left behind was more than jewelry, it was a legacy. And it wasn't meant to be found by Charles, Camilla, or even the Queen. The visit was unannounced, cloaked in subtle secrecy, and attended only by the barest whisper of staff. Diana arrived at Balmoral not with press fanfare or royal protocol, but with determination and silence. Something weighed heavily on her. Those close enough to observe later described her as withdrawn, contemplative, yet unusually focused. She wasn't there for rest or reflection. She had come to make a decision, one that would defy the very architecture of royal inheritance. While the palace believed Diana was simply retreating from the glare of media scrutiny, she was, in truth, securing her legacy in a way no one could alter. Her destination, the silver room, an archive of artifacts so restricted, even senior royals required permission to enter. It was in that room that Diana lingered longer than expected. A staff member, who has remained anonymous all these years, recalled seeing her sit before a locked cabinet, cradling a velvet-lined tiara box. She wasn't crying, she was writing. And when she emerged, she wasn't alone. In her hands, she held a sealed pouch. She summoned the royal archivist, Lord Halbridge, and in hushed tones instructed him to preserve the package under specific terms. It was to remain untouched unless directly requested by Prince Edward, and never under the jurisdiction of Clarence House. The pouch, she made clear, was not just about the tiara. It was about what the tiara represented. Inside was a handwritten codicil, unregistered and deeply personal. It held no legal force by the Crown's standards, yet its moral weight was seismic. The note detailed Diana's belief that one day a woman would emerge within the royal family who would restore what the institution had lost. Grace without manipulation, strength without spectacle. She named that woman. It was Catherine, not by accident, not as a passing thought, but as a clear and defiant intention. Diana's words left no room for ambiguity. To her, the note read, "I leave the peace that bore my silence because she will never be silent." The choice was deliberate, not only in choosing Catherine, but in excluding others. Her message included a chilling sentence, "Keep this from those who wear power as a costume." It was impossible to misread. The message was aimed at Camilla. Diana's distrust hadn't faded in death, it had crystallized. She didn't want the tiara worn by someone she believed would distort its meaning. She wanted it protected, preserved, and handed to someone she believed still carried innocence beneath the burden of duty. But while Diana's foresight was chilling, the real question was why Edward? Why not William? The answer lies in a brotherly pact forged in the shadow of royal politics and personal grief. In the intricate world of royal loyalties, alliances are forged in silence. Edward and Diana shared a bond rarely spoken, about one rooted in empathy and quiet understanding. And now, that forgotten oath had come back to haunt the Crown. It began in the early 90s, a time when the royal house was barely holding itself together under the weight of Charles and Diana's public unraveling. While the world watched the spectacle, there was one corner of the palace untouched by media intrusion, Edward's quiet wing. Overshadowed by his elder brothers and often dismissed in matters of succession, Edward became, quite unexpectedly, Diana's confidant. Not by formality, but by instinct. He never chased attention, and perhaps that's why she trusted him. Their late-night walks through the palace gardens, the hushed conversations away from the prying staff, these moments weren't recorded in official diaries, but they existed, woven into the hidden seams of royal history. In those rare, vulnerable exchanges, Diana found someone who didn't judge her, didn't try to fix her image, he simply listened. It was during one such conversation, when Diana was at her most disillusioned with the system that had consumed her youth, that she spoke the words Edward would never forget. "If anything ever happens to me," she said quietly, "you must guard what I've hidden." He asked no questions. He gave no promises out loud. But something unspoken passed between them that night. It wasn't a legal contract, it wasn't written in ink, but it bound him, heart and soul, to a secret he would protect for nearly 3 decades. Not once did he break that trust. Not even when Diana died. Not even when the public cried out for transparency. And not even when whispers inside the family suggested that the hidden piece, a tiara, a note, and a legacy, might have simply been imagined. He said nothing because Diana had asked him to, but that silence ended the moment he sensed danger. As Camilla's influence quietly expanded through subtle appointments and the reassignment of historical pieces, Edward began to see a pattern, one that risked turning Diana's silent bequest into another royal relic lost in the shuffle of control. There were conversations behind closed doors, documents being recatalogued, items being discussed for future exhibition, and troubling suggestions that unused royal jewels might be redistributed under Camilla's oversight. That was the moment Edward knew the time had come. His oath could no longer remain hidden. Diana's voice, preserved in paper and wrapped in velvet, had to be heard. He waited for the right moment, a formal meeting when the family would be seated, when Charles could not dismiss it as rumor, and when Catherine would be present to hear it with her own ears. What Edward unleashed that day was not just a revelation, it was a reckoning, a direct defiance of the quiet narrative the palace had carefully tried to manage. And yet, it wasn't about spectacle. It was about protecting what Diana saw in Catherine. Because Edward wasn't just honoring a promise, he was activating a prophecy. As the family unraveled from within, one figure stood at the center of Diana's prophecy and the crown's future. Catherine. Long before wedding bells or royal titles, Diana saw something in Catherine. A quiet strength, a resilience behind the smile. And in a moment that would alter royal history, she made a private decision, one the palace would try to bury. It was at a discreet charity dinner hosted by mutual friends of the aristocracy that Diana first crossed paths with Catherine. William had not yet formally introduced her to the family, but Diana, always a keen observer of emotional undercurrents, noticed the young woman in the crowd. There was no formal exchange, no dramatic encounter, just a passing glance, a fleeting smile, and a silence that carried weight. Later, in a diary entry never meant for public release, Diana would describe that moment in haunting clarity, the girl with steel in her soul and warmth in her eyes. She doesn't even know the storm she'll face, but she'll face it better than I did. That sentence, buried deep in a private volume later handed to Edward, would become the cornerstone of everything. Diana didn't name Catherine explicitly in the codicil, but the subtext was unmistakable. She wrote of a future woman, not of blood but of spirit, who would navigate the impossible with both grace and conviction. She saw what the monarchy refused to acknowledge at the time, a shifting era that needed a new kind of leader. Someone less concerned with image and more anchored in duty. It wasn't about beauty or popularity. It was about survival. Diana, having lived through betrayal and isolation, sensed in Catherine the antidote to the cold machinery of the crown. She believed Catherine wouldn't just wear the jewels, she would restore their meaning. And yet, even when Catherine officially entered the royal fold, few paid attention to that unspoken prophecy. Some dismissed it as romantic nonsense, the kind of sentiment Diana was known for. Others simply ignored it, wary of resurrecting Diana's name too often in the age of Camilla's rehabilitation. But when Edward confirmed the existence of Diana's written words, her preference, her foresight, her warning, the palace had no choice but to confront what had long been buried. And at the center of it all stood Catherine. Who hadn't asked for any of this, but who now carried the full weight of Diana's trust. Catherine's reaction was not one of celebration, but stunned stillness. Those who were present recalled her being motionless for nearly a full minute after Edward finished reading the note. Then, with a steadiness that surprised even William, she nodded. It was not a gesture of agreement, it was a signal of acceptance. William, deeply moved, later admitted that his mother once whispered to him, "She's the only future I trust. Protect her when I'm gone." Until that moment, he hadn't truly understood the depth of those words. Now, the message was no longer metaphor. It was action. It was legacy. It was real. But while Diana's vision stirred reverence, it sparked fury elsewhere, especially from the one woman who believed she had already claimed Diana's place. She had waited years to step into Diana's shoes, and now, in a matter of seconds, the illusion shattered. Camilla's fury echoed through the halls as she accused Edward of betrayal and Catherine of theft. But the papers didn't lie. The tiara had never been meant for her. Camilla didn't blink. She didn't wait. The moment Edward uttered Diana's name and unfolded the sealed parchment, something inside her cracked. Her voice, cold and sharp, sliced through the stunned silence. "This changes nothing." But it did. Every eye in the room could see it, the unraveling. The carefully composed mask she'd worn for decades faltered. She turned on Edward first, accusing him of staging the moment to embarrass her, of dredging up the past to undermine her position. Her words were heavy, deliberate, meant to wound. "You've been waiting to do this for years," she hissed, "and now you're hiding behind Diana's ghost." But Edward stood unmoved, hands steady, voice calm. He didn't flinch. What he had done wasn't about humiliation, it was about duty. The more he remained silent, the louder Camilla became. Her anger, once simmering behind palace walls, now spilled into the open. She turned to William, expecting some measure of defense, but found none. He stayed seated beside Catherine, his jaw clenched, his eyes locked forward. That silence was more telling than any argument. It was a choice, one that shook Camilla to her core. Anne tried to intervene, stepping between them, but her attempt to de-escalate landed with hesitation. Her loyalty, long believed to lean toward duty over emotion, now appeared uncertain. Her eyes darted between Edward and Camilla, but her words lacked conviction. "This isn't the place," she said softly. But it was. This was precisely the place where the unspoken had to be said. where the facade finally cracked. And then, the most devastating silence of all Charles. He hadn't spoken a single word. Not when the document was revealed. Not when Camilla erupted. Not even when the room dissolved into a cold, conflicted haze. His stillness wasn't passive, it was calculated. He watched everything, said nothing, and in that moment Camilla knew. She was standing alone. His silence wasn't ignorance, it was acknowledgement, and it pierced deeper than any betrayal. Her exit was dramatic, with one final glare directed not at Edward, but at Catherine. Camilla declared she would be calling for an emergency session of the Royal Council. Historical misplacement, she claimed, must be corrected before irreparable damage is done. But no one followed her out. The door closed behind her, and the air felt heavier than ever before. But Camilla's outrage couldn't erase what followed next, the unlocking of a royal vault untouched for decades. The key was old, the room untouched. And as the royal archivist turned the lock with trembling hands, what lay inside was more than jewels. It was a ghost, a symbol. And proof that Diana's intentions had never been erased. Summoned, under Edward's authority, the royal archivist, Lord Halbridge, now long retired, returned to Balmoral for the first time in over a decade. He alone knew the location of the sealed compartment. The rest had either forgotten or been told to. Behind a false panel in the silver room, marked only by a barely visible crown etching, was a lock few had dared to touch. The silence in that room was deafening as the key slid in. With a slow click, the compartment opened, and what it revealed was not just a forgotten artifact. It was a reckoning. Resting in deep blue velvet, completely untouched by time, was a tiara unlike any ever worn on public record. Not listed in royal catalogues, not photographed, not even whispered about. Alongside it was a letter, sealed in crimson wax and bearing Diana's unmistakable crest. Edward didn't read it alone. He requested witnesses. William, Anne, Beatrice, Catherine. No cameras, no press, just the words of a woman who had seen the future more clearly than anyone else in that room. When the seal broke, the silence thickened. Diana's handwriting was unmistakable, delicate yet determined. The letter was brief, but devastating in its clarity. For the woman who will restore dignity to the crown. My choice is Catherine. That single sentence shook the room. There was no reference to Charles, no mention of Camilla, only a powerful, unshakable message from beyond the grave, an endorsement, a warning, and a transfer of symbolic power. Beatrice reportedly wiped away tears. She had never known this side of Diana, yet something in the words moved her. Anne, ever composed, lowered her eyes and gave a single nod. It was the closest she had come to acknowledging Diana's lasting impact in years. For a moment, unity settled where conflict had festered. No one spoke for several minutes, not even Catherine. When she finally approached the tiara, her hand hovered just above the velvet. She did not lift it. She did not wear it. She simply touched it, then stepped back, refusing to claim it in that moment. There was no arrogance, no triumph, only reverence. The choice had been made for her, but the responsibility, she understood, was hers alone to carry. Edward folded the letter back into its envelope, then placed it beside the tiara. Let history bear witness, he said quietly. Diana made her choice. The tension in the room didn't dissolve, it shifted. Because this was never just about jewelry. It was about the shifting axis of royal identity. The old world had spoken, and the new one had just been named. But claiming the tiara wasn't about jewelry. It was about legacy, and some within the family weren't ready to accept Catherine's rise without a fight. The Obsidian Council, the Crown's most discreet advisory body, was summoned for an emergency session. Their dilemma: honor Diana's posthumous decree or preserve Camilla's symbolic authority. The monarchy teetered on a precipice, and one vote could change its course. Behind sealed doors and beyond the reach of public eyes, the council gathered under high alert. Composed of senior royals, historic advisors, and a select few legal stewards of crown tradition, the Obsidian Council was rarely convened, only in times of constitutional ambiguity or imminent reputational peril. This, it seemed, was both. The revelation of Diana's sealed letter, the resurfaced tiara, and Catherine's quiet but unmistakable ascension had plunged the monarchy into an identity crisis it could no longer ignore. The question wasn't merely symbolic. It struck at the very tension between the past and the present, whether a dead princess's private will could hold sway over an established queen consort. The room was split before the first word was spoken. So, me argued Diana's wishes, while heartfelt carried no constitutional legitimacy. Her letter was personal, not political. Her gift symbolic, not binding. But Edward countered with calm defiance. The codicil, he reminded them, had been sealed under royal protocol, filed quietly through the Balmoral archives, and acknowledged though never acted upon by Lord Halbridge himself. William added a rare burst of fire to the argument, stating that his mother's foresight was not to be interpreted as a challenge to the crown, but as an act of preservation. She saw something coming, he said, and now that it's here, we either acknowledge her warning or pretend we never heard it. The rift deepened with every hour. Beatrice and Anne both broke from expectation. Beatrice, often diplomatic to a fault, spoke passionately about legacy, fairness, and the need for the monarchy to show it could still feel. Anne, known for discipline and loyalty, surprised many when she firmly declared, "Diana made her choice. We are not here to erase her." But across the table, Camilla's defenders clung to tradition. They insisted that to honor Diana's letter would be to undermine the current structure, to destabilize the line of respect Charles had fought to rebuild around Camilla's presence. It wasn't about a tiara, they argued. It was about order. Then came the moment no one expected. Charles abstained. His voice, when he finally spoke, was low and distant. "There is nothing more I can add. I leave this to the council." That silence, that abdication of influence, sent a ripple of unease through the chamber. Without the king's weight behind Camilla, her position suddenly felt precarious. The final outcome was a compromise. There would be no official ceremony, no formal declaration, but Diana's letter would be entered into the private royal record. Catherine's connection to the tiara would be acknowledged. Symbolically, she would be seen as its rightful bearer. But behind the polished resolution was a current of unresolved tension. This wasn't closure, it was containment. The council had avoided a crisis for now, but at a cost. Respect had shifted, power had quietly realigned, and Catherine, still silent, had moved one step closer to a throne she never asked for but could no longer escape. Even as political battles brewed behind closed doors, the public would soon witness a moment that no one could have predicted, and no one would forget. She stepped out, not just as a royal, but as Diana's chosen. With flashbulbs firing and the world watching, Catherine wore the tiara for the first time. Camilla watched from the shadows, and across the world, a wave of emotion swept through history. The event had been scheduled months in advance, a diplomatic reception hosted by one of the Commonwealth's oldest allies. At the time, no one could have predicted its symbolism would shift from political courtesy to a coronation of legacy. All eyes were on Catherine not because of her title, but because of what she chose to wear. The moment she arrived, the press knew something was different. It wasn't a modern piece or a familiar crown. It was the one spoken of in whispers, the one that had sparked fury, silence, and a royal reckoning, the hidden tiara, Diana's last bequest. For the first time in history, it shimmered in public view on the head of the woman Diana had chosen in secret and trusted in silence. The reaction was immediate. Cameras froze in mid-shot. Headlines were rewritten in real time. Across continents, social feeds exploded with comparisons to Diana's legacy and declarations that her spirit had returned. The phrase trended globally, "Diana's true legacy lives on." For a public that had watched the monarchy battle its own shadow for years, this felt like resolution. But it wasn't just sentiment, it was power. The simple act of wearing that tiara, unannounced, unspoken, and undisputed, sent a message the palace couldn't spin. The past hadn't just returned, it had reclaimed its place. Camilla's absence did not go unnoticed. The palace released a carefully worded statement citing personal matters, but the timing was impossible to ignore. Some insiders hinted at health concerns, others whispered of strategic withdrawal, but the silence from her circle confirmed what many already suspected: she had been blindsided. Catherine had not waited for approval, she had not requested permission. She had simply answered a calling left for her by a woman who had once been silenced. Now her voice rang louder than ever through Catherine. William's speech, though brief, left no room for doubt. Standing beside his wife, he looked toward the gathered dignitaries and said only 6 words. This was always hers. Always was. In that moment, the arc of royal history bent. It was more than support, it was vindication. And it came with another wave of emotion when Queen Elizabeth's former aide, speaking off record to a trusted journalist, confirmed that Diana had once shared her intentions privately. She said it in passing, he revealed. That if she could choose, it would be Catherine. She never wavered in that. This was not a ceremony, it was a culmination. Not declared, but felt. Not celebrated with trumpets, but marked in silence, pride, and emotional release. And yet, even as the public roared with approval, and the monarchy stood momentarily united under a shared memory, the storm hadn't passed. It had merely changed form. But the story doesn't end with public triumph. Because behind the grandeur, another figure was watching, waiting, and quietly planning their next move. Just when it seemed the storm had passed, Princess Anne called Catherine into the blue room. In her hand, another velvet pouch. Diana's voice wasn't done speaking, and neither was her legacy. One more gift, one final twist. The tiara had already stirred the monarchy. The council had made its symbolic decision. Public sentiment was roaring in Catherine's favour. But away from the headlines, behind the palace's quietest doors, something even more personal was unfolding. Anne, whose role throughout the ordeal had remained measured and observant, had chosen her moment with calculated grace. She didn't call a meeting. She didn't request an audience. She simply walked to Catherine's private quarters, knocked once, and asked her to come to the blue room. It wasn't a request, it was a passing of something far older than power. It was the surrender of a silent understanding between 2 women, one past, one present, with Anne as the bridge. Inside the pouch was no crown, no legal document, no fanfare, just a handwritten letter and a small, unassuming sapphire pin. The letter, dated just months before Diana's final trip to Paris, bore her signature and a single line beneath the envelope flap: to Catherine, when the time is right. It was not a public declaration. It was a private testimony, and perhaps the most intimate of all. Diana's words flowed differently in this letter, less guarded, more affectionate. She spoke of Anne surprisingly with great admiration. She acknowledged their once distant relationship, but praised her for protecting the crown with the spine of a soldier and the heart of a daughter. And then she wrote of Catherine, not as a daughter-in-law she'd never meet, but as someone she had somehow already seen, someone she believed would endure. You will be questioned, you will be tested, but I believe in you. Not because of you are, but because of who you are. The sapphire pin, Diana noted, was not part of any royal collection. It had never been catalogued, never loaned, never worn in public. It had been her quiet token, something she wore in private moments, especially during times of doubt. When I needed to remember who I was, she wrote, I touched this. Anne, in turn, revealed she had found the pin years ago in Diana's old private dressing case, tucked beneath a false drawer panel. She had kept it, not out of secrecy, but because she was waiting. I didn't know what I was waiting for, she admitted, until now. Catherine accepted the gift with no words. None were needed. She held the letter in her hands, placed the pin gently back into the pouch, and nodded once. There was no ceremony, no witness list. But in that moment, a torch was passed, not with crowns or titles, but through trust, pain, and memory. The final piece of Diana's puzzle had been found, and it didn't come with noise. It came with clarity. This wasn't just about jewels or tradition. This was about who the monarchy would become. And if you think the palace has seen the last of Diana's whispers, think again. Subscribe now, because the next revelation might just rewrite everything. Thanks for watching. Please don't forget to like and subscribe, and we will see you in next one.